Wisdom, that's the test. Which rival wisdom team is best? 52 teams of 8 antique rival wisdoms that have passed the test of time to encourage, educate, and entertain generations for centuries.
Team 18. Transform practically. Quote definitions, biographical context, and synergy analysis. 2. Replace hate with motivationaleducation.com to guidealife.com. Quote 18.1. A friend may well be reckoned the masterpiece of nature. Ralph Waldo Emerson, 1803 to 1882. Quote definition. Among all the products of natural processes, landscapes, organisms, ecosystems, the human body itself, genuine friendship stands as the most extraordinary achievement, a voluntary, mutual, freely chosen relationship of understanding, loyalty, and care that has no biological compulsion behind it and yet represents the highest expression of what human beings are capable of creating together. Quote application. The mission of making America wiser and kinder is ultimately a mission of building friendship in Emerson's sense, the masterpiece-level connection that sees another person clearly and chooses them freely. Every wise community, every act of genuine kindness, every replaced hatred is a step toward the civilization that treats human friendship as the masterpiece it is rather than the accident it so often becomes. Ralph Waldo Emerson was born in 1803 in Boston, the son of a Unitarian minister who died when Emerson was 8, leaving the family in poverty. He was educated at Harvard College and Harvard Divinity School, became a Unitarian pastor, and resigned his pulpit in 1832 when he could no longer in conscience administer the Lord's Supper, a rupture that launched him on the path that would make him the most influential American philosopher and essayist of the 19th century. His essays, Nature, Self-Reliance, The Oversoul, Friendship, Circles, defined the Transcendentalist movement and shaped the thinking of Thoreau, Whitman, William James, and generations of American writers and thinkers after them. His essay Friendship, from which this observation is drawn, is one of the most searching explorations of the subject in American literature. Emerson approached friendship with the same combination of high standards and honest realism that characterized all his best thinking. He celebrated it as nature's masterpiece, while acknowledging with painful honesty how rarely the genuine article exists, how easily it is confused with pleasanter but shallower forms of association, and how much genuine friendship demands of the people who would practice it. He had experienced friendship at its highest level in his relationships with Thomas Carlyle, Margaret Fuller, and Henry David Thoreau, and at its most painful limits in the deaths of his first wife Ellen and his closest friend Martin Gay. He knew the masterpiece from the inside, and he knew the cost of losing it. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Elevate the pursuit and cultivation of genuine friendship to the level of serious life priority, not as a social luxury, but as the highest natural achievement available to human beings. 2. Distinguish between genuine friendship, the masterpiece, and its more common substitutes, pleasant acquaintance, useful alliance, comfortable familiarity. 3. Invest the effort that genuine friendship requires, the honest engagement, the tolerance of difference, the willingness to be known as well as to know. 4. Recognize that communities built on genuine friendship in Emerson's sense are the most resilient and most genuinely transformative communities available because the masterpiece connection is both the goal and the mechanism of human flourishing. Emerson's friendship with Henry David Thoreau is one of the most illuminating in American literary history. Emerson was 14 years older, nationally famous, financially comfortable. Thoreau was unknown, poor, and difficult. Emerson recognized Thoreau's genius immediately and provided him land, housing, employment, and intellectual community for decades. Thoreau's most famous work, Walden, was written in a cabin on land Emerson owned. The friendship was not without friction. Thoreau could be stubborn and Emerson could be distant, but it was genuine, durable, and mutually transformative. It was, in Emerson's own terms, a masterpiece, built by two people willing to invest what genuine friendship required.
Quote 18.2. Among mortals, second thoughts are wisest. Euripides 480 to 406 BC. Quote definition. The first thought, the immediate, instinctive reaction to a situation, person, or problem, is characteristically shaped by emotion, habit, and incomplete information. The second thought, arrived at after deliberation, reflection, and the willingness to reconsider, is consistently wiser because it has had the opportunity to correct what the first thought missed or distorted. Quote application. Hatred is almost always a first thought, an immediate, unreflective reaction to difference, threat, or unfamiliarity that a second thought would revise. The entire educational mission of spreading wisdom is an invitation to second thoughts, to revisit the first impressions and inherited assumptions that first thoughts generated and ask whether they survive the scrutiny that second thoughts apply. Euripides was born around 480 BC in Athens and became, along with Aeschylus and Sophocles, one of the three great tragedians of ancient Greece whose work has survived to the present day. Of the three, Euripides was the most psychologically probing, the most interested in the inner lives of his characters, particularly his female characters, and the most willing to challenge the conventional pieties of Athenian society. His Medea, Hippolytus, the Trojan women, and Electra are among the most psychologically sophisticated works of ancient drama, presenting characters whose motivations and contradictions feel startlingly modern. He was criticized in his own time for presenting heroes who were too human, too conflicted, too driven by emotion, too far from the idealized figures of traditional mythology, and he responded to that criticism by writing more of the same. His observation about second thoughts reflects both his dramatic philosophy and his understanding of how human beings actually make decisions. His plays are full of characters who act on first thoughts, on immediate passion, on unreflective convention, on the unexamined assumptions of their culture, and suffer the consequences. Medea acts on first thought rage, Phaedra acts on first thought desire, Hecuba acts on first thought grief. The tragedies are not arguments against feeling but arguments for the second thoughts that feeling, unchecked, overrides. Euripides had spent his career dramatizing the cost of first thoughts and the wisdom that second thoughts, however painful, would have provided, and he articulated the lesson directly in this observation that has outlasted every one of his plots. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Build the habit of deliberate second thoughts as a standard practice rather than an occasional corrective, applying it to first impressions of people, situations, and ideas before acting on them. 2. Recognize first thoughts as valuable information. They tell you something about your emotional state and habitual responses, but not as reliable guides to wise action without revision. 3. Create the conditions, time, reflection, honest self-examination, that allow second thoughts to develop before significant decisions are made. 4. Apply this principle to the formation of opinions about people. First thoughts about those who are different are almost always distorted by unfamiliarity and should be subjected to the second thought revision that Euripides prescribes. Euripides spent the last 2 years of his life in Macedonia at the court of King Archelaus, having left Athens, apparently voluntarily though the reasons are debated, in his mid-70s. He died there in 406 BC. The Athenians, who had been famously indifferent to his work during his lifetime, he won the first prize at the dramatic festivals only 4 times in a career spanning 50 years, mourned him deeply after his death and recognized in retrospect what the second thoughts his plays demanded had been worth. Their first thought assessment of his work had missed what his second thought assessment of human nature had so precisely captured.
Quote 18.3, Ability is nothing without opportunity. Napoleon Bonaparte 1769–1821. Quote definition. Raw capability, intelligence, talent, skill, energy, exists in many people who never realize its potential because the circumstances required to deploy it are systematically absent or denied to them. Opportunity is not the supplement to ability but its essential precondition. Without it, ability remains latent, frustrated, and ultimately wasted. Quote application. This principle is one of the most powerful arguments for equity and access in the collection. The talent and intelligence that could replace hate with wisdom exists in communities that have been systematically denied the opportunities to deploy it. ReplaceHate.org's mission of providing free wisdom education is itself an act of opportunity creation, opening the conditions in which latent ability can become actual impact. Napoleon Bonaparte was born in 1769 in Ajaccio, Corsica, just 1 year after France purchased the island from Genoa, making him, technically, barely French by birth. He was educated at military schools in France on a scholarship, graduated from the École Militaire in Paris in 1 year instead of the usual 2, and received his commission as a second lieutenant in the artillery at 16. The French Revolution, which began when he was 20, dissolved the aristocratic barriers that had capped the advancement of talented officers from non-noble families, and Napoleon, who had the ability but not the birth, rose with extraordinary speed through a series of military campaigns that demonstrated tactical genius of a quality that the previous generation's army structure would never have allowed him to express. His observation about ability and opportunity was therefore autobiographical in the most direct possible sense. He was the living example of what happened when ability encountered opportunity. He had possessed the ability before the revolution. The revolution provided the opportunity. The combination produced one of the most consequential military and political careers in Western history. He also, with characteristic analytical clarity, understood the obverse. The vast number of people who possess comparable or greater ability, but never encountered the conditions in which it could be expressed, and whose potential was therefore permanently lost to the world. He had been lucky enough to be born at precisely the moment when the structures denying opportunity to talent were being dismantled. Most people with comparable ability were not so lucky. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Recognize the structural dimension of achievement. The role of opportunity in determining whose ability gets expressed and whose does not, rather than attributing outcomes entirely to individual merit or its absence. 2. Invest in creating opportunities for others as a direct contribution to the flourishing of human potential that would otherwise remain latent and wasted. 3. Apply this principle to the community's most systematically denied opportunity, understanding that the absence of achievement where opportunity has been absent is not evidence of absent ability. 4. Recognize opportunity creation as one of the highest forms of service available, providing the conditions in which other people's ability can finally become actual impact. Napoleon's career ended in defeat, exile, and death on St. Helena. The consequences of the very ability-opportunity combination that had created it, deployed finally in service of ambitions that exceeded even his extraordinary capacity to sustain them. But his insight about ability and opportunity outlasted his career's trajectory, and has been cited by educators, reformers, and advocates for equity in every generation since. He understood the mechanism precisely from the inside, having been both its beneficiary and, in denying opportunity to the peoples he conquered, its instrument of deprivation.
Quote 18.4. All this worldly wisdom was once the unamiable heresy of some wise man. Henry David Thoreau, 1817–1862. Quote definition. Every principle, insight, and moral truth that is now accepted as obvious common sense was once considered dangerous, disruptive, or simply wrong by the consensus of its time. The wisdom that seems self-evident today was yesterday's heresy, advanced by someone willing to think and say what the dominant culture was not yet ready to accept. Quote application. The wisdom of these 52 teams is not neutral. Much of it challenges comfortable assumptions, extends concern beyond conventional limits, and insists on the equal dignity of people that prevailing culture has often been willing to dismiss. Thoreau's principle is the historical assurance. What seems heretical now often becomes worldly wisdom later, and the willingness to advance it before it is fashionable is exactly what makes the eventual acceptance possible. Henry David Thoreau appears in Teams 12 and 15 as well, where his principle of avoiding the beginnings of evil anchored strategic transformation, and his principle of knowing yourself to improve yourself grounded the internal discipline of truthful living. Here, in Team 18, his deepest historical observation takes center stage. Thoreau was born in 1817 in Concord, Massachusetts, graduated from Harvard in 1837, and spent most of his adult life in or near Concord, surveying, writing, lecturing, and living with a deliberateness and integrity that made him simultaneously the most admired and the most exasperating person in Emerson's circle. Walden and Civil Disobedience are his most famous works, but his journal, kept daily for 24 years and running to over 2 million words, is the fullest record of a mind that never stopped observing, questioning, and revising. His observation about heresy and worldly wisdom reflects both his reading of intellectual history and his direct personal experience of being in advance of his time. His refusal to pay the poll tax, his advocacy for John Brown, his insistence on the moral bankruptcy of slavery long before abolition was politically acceptable. All of these were positions that the dominant consensus of his time considered not merely wrong but disruptive and dangerous. He had also read enough history to know that this pattern was universal. Every moral advance in human civilization had been preceded by someone willing to articulate what the consensus was not ready to hear, absorb the criticism that heresy always generates, and maintain the position long enough for the world to catch up. The worldly wisdom of one generation is always the previous generation's uncomfortable heresy. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Evaluate moral and intellectual positions by their internal merit rather than by their current acceptability. Consensus is a lagging indicator of truth, not a reliable guide to it. 2. Maintain positions that current consensus finds uncomfortable when genuine examination supports them. The discomfort is not evidence of error but often evidence of correctness. 3. Extend historical patience to the reception of wisdom that currently faces resistance. What seems heretical now will often seem obvious in 20 years. 4. Recognize the role of the willing heretic in the advancement of human understanding. Someone has to say the uncomfortable thing first, and that person is doing civilization a service regardless of the reception they receive. Thoreau died of tuberculosis in 1862 at 44, largely unknown outside a small circle of New England intellectuals. Walden had sold modestly. Civil disobedience had circulated in limited form. Within 20 years, his reputation had grown substantially. Within 50, he was recognized as one of the most important American writers of the 19th century. Within 100, Gandhi and King had credited his heretical insistence on principled resistance to unjust law as foundational to the two most consequential nonviolent movements of the 20th century. His heresy had become worldly wisdom. It just took longer than he lived to see.
Quote 18.5 Love's language is imprecise, fits more like mittens than gloves. Sarah Breedlove, Madam C.J. Walker, 1867 to 1919. Quote definition. The language of love, the words, gestures, and expressions through which genuine care is communicated, does not fit perfectly or precisely. Like mittens rather than gloves, it covers and warms without perfectly conforming to every individual contour. The imprecision is not a failure of love, but a feature of it. Love encompasses rather than fits exactly, and its warmth is real even when its expression is approximate. Quote application. For the mission of making America wiser and kinder, this is one of the most practically liberating principles in the collection. The language of genuine care and connection does not have to be perfect to be real and effective. Imperfect but genuine expressions of kindness, the mitten rather than the glove, warm the people they reach far more than perfectly worded but emotionally hollow communications. The warmth matters more than the fit. Sarah Breedlove, Madam C.J. Walker, appears in Teams 9 and 10 as well, where her principles of humanity-first service and active opportunity-making anchored those teams' frameworks. Here, in Team 18, a different and more intimate dimension of her wisdom takes center stage. This observation about love's language comes from a woman whose entire life was an exercise in communicating genuine care across multiple imprecisions. The imprecision of poverty that couldn't afford the words wealth provides, the imprecision of limited formal education that nevertheless contained extraordinary intelligence, the imprecision of a society that consistently misread her humanity through the distorting lens of race and gender. Breedlove's mitten metaphor is remarkable for its combination of warmth and honest acknowledgement of limitation. She was not claiming that love communicates perfectly. She had lived enough to know it doesn't. She was claiming that imperfect communication of genuine love is immeasurably more valuable than the absence of communication, while waiting for perfect expression to arrive. The mitten that warms your hands is not less valuable because it doesn't perfectly contour each finger. Its value is in the warmth it provides, which gloves provide more precisely, but which mittens provide just as really. Her own expressions of love, to her employees, to the communities she served, to the causes she funded, were often imprecise in their form but unmistakable in their warmth. She modeled what she described. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Release the perfectionism that delays genuine expressions of care while waiting for the exactly right words, gesture, or form. The mitten warms now, and now is when the warmth is needed. 2. Recognize that the imprecision of love's language is not a flaw to be corrected, but a feature to be accepted. Encompassing warmth is what love actually provides. 3. Value the genuinely intended, but imperfectly expressed kindness of others, rather than critiquing the fit of the mitten while the cold is happening. 4. Apply this principle to communication across difference specifically. The language of genuine care between people of different backgrounds, experiences, and cultures will always fit more like mittens than gloves. And that is enough. Breedlove's business empire was itself an expression of this principle at scale. Her hair care products were not perfect solutions to every problem her customers faced. No product could be. But they provided real warmth, real economic opportunity for the women who sold them, real dignity for the women who used them in a culture that had systematically denied both. The mitten of her enterprise fit imprecisely but warmed unmistakably. She understood that waiting for the glove would have meant perpetual cold, and she built the mitten instead.
Quote 18.6. He that complies against his will is of his own opinion still. Samuel Butler, 1835-1902. Quote definition. Compelled compliance produces behavioral change without genuine persuasion. The person forced to act against their convictions retains those convictions intact beneath the surface compliance, ready to reassert themselves the moment the compulsion is removed. Real change of opinion requires genuine persuasion, not external pressure. Quote application. This is the practical case for wisdom-based approaches over coercive ones in the work of replacing hate. Laws can compel behavior. Only genuine understanding changes minds. The hateful person compelled to comply is still hateful, and waiting for the compliance requirement to ease. The person genuinely persuaded that all human beings deserve dignity is changed in a way that no compulsion can reverse. Samuel Butler was born in 1835 in Longar, Nottinghamshire, England, the son of a Church of England clergyman and the grandson of Samuel Butler the Elder, Bishop of Lichfield. He was educated at Shrewsbury School and St. John's College, Cambridge, and was expected to enter the church, a plan he abandoned when he could not reconcile his religious doubts with ordination. He emigrated to New Zealand, ran a sheep station for several years, returned to England with a modest fortune, and spent the rest of his life as a writer, painter, and independent intellectual whose work consistently challenged received opinion in biology, religious thought, and literary history. His novel Erewhon, a satirical utopia, and The Way of All Flesh, a devastating semi-autobiographical account of Victorian family life, are his most lasting works, both of which were too unconventional to achieve popular success during his lifetime. The observation about compelled compliance comes from the tradition of Hudibras, the long satirical poem by the earlier Samuel Butler, 1613-1680, from which this Butler drew the line. But the younger Butler's use of it reflects his own consistent engagement with the question of genuine versus performed belief. He had watched Victorian England enforce religious and social conformity through institutional pressure, social stigma, and family coercion, and he had observed, both in his own experience of family pressure toward ordination and in his broader observation of society, that the compliance it produced was almost entirely superficial. People said what was expected, did what was required, and thought whatever they had always thought, privately and persistently. The opinion survived the compliance completely intact. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Invest in genuine persuasion, engaging people's actual reasoning, appealing to their genuine values, providing real evidence, rather than in the external pressure that produces compliance without conviction. 2. Recognize that compelled compliance is a temporary state that reverses when the compulsion is removed, while genuine persuasion produces durable change that holds without enforcement. 3. Apply this principle to the work of community building. Communities held together by social pressure alone are fragile. Communities united by genuine shared conviction are resilient. 4. Understand that the person still of their own opinion beneath the surface compliance is not a failure, but a human being who has not yet been genuinely reached, and who deserves the genuine persuasion that compliant behavior has been substituted for. Samuel Butler died in 1902, leaving instructions for The Way of All Flesh to be published posthumously. He knew it would be too recognizable to his still living family members to publish during his lifetime. The novel was published in 1903 and immediately recognized as a masterpiece of psychological realism. He had complied, for decades, with the social expectation of privacy about family matters, but his opinion had remained entirely his own, and when the compliance was no longer necessary, the opinion was published with full force. He proved his own principle from the inside.
Quote 18.7. Philosophy is common sense with big words. James Madison 1751–1836. Quote definition. The most profound philosophical insights about justice, about human nature, about how societies should be organized, are not exotic intellectual achievements accessible only to specialists. They are the systematic articulation of what careful common sense, applied consistently to real human experience, naturally produces. The big words are labels for what thoughtful people already understand. They are not the understanding itself. Quote application. The wisdom in these 52 teams does not require philosophical training to receive or apply. It requires the willingness to think carefully about what careful thinkers have already understood. Madison's principle is the democratization of philosophical wisdom. Common sense, applied consistently and honestly, is both the source and the destination of the best philosophical thinking. Everyone has access to it. James Madison was born in 1751 at Montpelier. His family's plantation in Orange County, Virginia, was educated at the College of New Jersey, now Princeton, and became the most intellectually rigorous of the American founders, the person whose study of political theory, constitutional history, and the mechanics of Republican government was most directly responsible for the design of the United States Constitution. He is called the father of the Constitution not as a courtesy but as a description. The Virginia plan that served as the convention's working draft was primarily his. The system of checks and balances reflects his analysis of how power corrupts, and the Federalist Papers, 51 of which he co-authored with Hamilton and Jay, are the most important American contribution to political philosophy. His observation about philosophy and common sense reflects both his approach to political theory and his practice as a constitutional designer. He had read extensively in ancient and modern political philosophy, Aristotle, Locke, Montesquieu, Hume, and had concluded that their most important insights were not arcane theoretical discoveries but the systematic expression of what careful attention to how governments actually worked revealed. The separation of powers was common sense about how concentrated authority corrupts, expressed in institutional form. The Bill of Rights was common sense about how majorities abuse minorities, expressed in constitutional guarantees. Federalism was common sense about how both local knowledge and national coordination contribute to good governance, expressed in structural division. He had taken common sense seriously enough to build a country on it. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Approach philosophical and intellectual content with the confidence that genuine understanding does not require specialized vocabulary. The big words are labels, not the substance. 2. Trust common sense carefully applied as a legitimate and powerful tool for arriving at genuine wisdom, not a substitute for rigorous thinking but its accessible form. 3. Resist the mystification of wisdom that keeps it the province of specialists. Genuine philosophy democratizes rather than restricts, because its source is common human experience. 4. Apply this principle to the work of spreading wisdom. The most effective transmission is in language that common sense can receive, not in vocabulary that signals membership in an intellectual class. Madison lived to 85, the longest-lived of the major founders, and spent his post-presidential years at Montpelier, managing his plantation, which he failed to do successfully, dying deeply in debt, corresponding with the leading figures of the next generation of American politics, and refining the notes he had kept of the Constitutional Convention debates. Those notes, published after his death in 1840, remain the primary source for understanding what the founders intended. He had built his most important work on the common sense that his observation prescribes, and the philosophical framework that organized it has governed the most durable constitutional democracy in history.
Quote 18.8. Commerce changes the fate and genius of nations. Thomas Gray, 1716–1771. Quote definition. The patterns of economic exchange, what a society produces, trades, values commercially, and builds its livelihoods around, are not merely financial arrangements. They reshape the culture, the character, the intellectual tendencies, and the creative capacities of the people who participate in them. Commerce is not just the economy, it is a civilizational force that changes what a nation is capable of thinking and making. Quote application. The commerce of ideas, the exchange and circulation of wisdom, kindness, and genuine human understanding, changes the fate and genius of communities just as material commerce changes nations. Every time a wisdom quote is shared, a workbook distributed, a community gathered around better thinking, the cultural commerce of the mission changes what that community is capable of. Commerce in wisdom is civilization-shaping work. Thomas Gray was born in 1716 in London, the son of a scrivener, and the only one of 12 children to survive to adulthood. He was educated at Eton, where he formed lasting friendships with Horace Walpole and Richard West, and at Peterhouse, Cambridge, which he attended but left without a degree before returning later in life to become a fellow and eventually Regius Professor of modern history. He is remembered primarily as the author of one poem, Elegy written in a country churchyard, published in 1751, and immediately recognized as one of the greatest poems in the English language. It remains, by some measures, the most quoted poem in English literature. Its lines about the mute, inglorious Miltons buried in country churchyards and the paths of glory leading, but to the grave, are among the most memorable in the language. Gray's observation about commerce and national character reflects his engagement with the economic and social history of his era, the period of expanding British trade, the growth of colonial commerce, and the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution that would transform British society within a generation of his death. He had read widely in economic history and observed with the attentiveness of a poet who noticed everything, how the rise of commercial culture in England was reshaping not just the economy, but the culture's preoccupations, its values, its aesthetic sensibilities, and its relationship to the past. Commerce was changing what England thought about, what it valued, what it could imagine. The observation was not a complaint, but an analysis. Commerce is a civilizational force, and understanding it as such is essential to understanding what a nation is becoming. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Understand commerce in its broadest sense, the exchange not just of goods and services, but of ideas, values, and cultural products, as a genuine civilizational force that shapes what societies are capable of. 2. Recognize that what a community exchanges, values commercially, and builds its collective attention around gradually becomes what that community is. Commercially shaped character is real character. 3. Apply this principle to the commerce of wisdom. What ideas circulate most freely in a community shapes the thinking, the values, and ultimately the character of that community over time. For invest in changing the commerce of ideas in communities where hatred circulates freely, because changing what ideas are exchanged changes what the community is capable of becoming. Thomas Gray spent most of his adult life at Cambridge, declining social opportunities that would have taken him away from the libraries, the correspondence, and the solitary reflection that were the conditions his genius required. He turned down the poet laureateship when it was offered. The commerce of official recognition was not what he was in business for. He produced very little verse. The complete poems fit in a slim volume, but what he produced changed English poetry permanently. His commerce was in exactly the right things, and it changed the fate and genius of a literary tradition that has not recovered from his influence.
How they work together as a unified philosophy. The Transform Practically framework. Human foundation layer. Friendship as masterpiece and second thoughts as wisest. Quotes 1, 2. Emerson. Establish genuine friendship, nature's masterpiece, as the highest practical achievement of human relationship, setting the standard of connection that all practical transformation must ultimately serve. Euripides. Provide the epistemic discipline that genuine friendship and genuine transformation both require. The willingness to subject first thoughts to second thought revision, catching what immediate reaction distorted or missed. Together. Define the human foundation of practical transformation. The masterpiece of genuine friendship as the goal, and the wisdom of second thoughts as the method for arriving at the accurate understanding of people and situations that genuine friendship requires. Emerson sets the standard. The masterpiece-level connection that sees another person clearly and chooses them freely. Euripides provides the practice that makes such seeing possible. The deliberate revision of first impressions that reveals what initial reaction concealed. Together they describe the practically transforming person as one who pursues genuine connection through genuinely revised understanding. Opportunity layer. Ability needs opportunity and heresy becomes wisdom. Quotes 3-4. Napoleon. Name the structural reality that ability without opportunity remains latent, making opportunity creation a moral and practical imperative rather than a charitable extra. Thoreau. Provide the historical assurance that today's heretical wisdom becomes tomorrow's common sense, making the willingness to advance uncomfortable truth before it is fashionable a genuine service to the civilization that will eventually adopt it. Together. Define the conditions and the time horizon of practical transformation. Napoleon establishes that genuine transformation requires creating the opportunities in which latent ability can finally be expressed. Without that structural work, potential remains permanently frustrated. Thoreau establishes that transformation operates on longer time scales than impatience accommodates. The wisdom that seems heretical now will seem obvious eventually, and acting on it before it is fashionable is exactly what makes the eventual acceptance possible. Together they describe practical transformation as both structurally active, creating opportunity, and temporally patient, advancing what will eventually be accepted even before it currently is. Communication layer. Imprecise love and genuine persuasion. Quotes 5-6. Breed love. Liberate the expression of genuine care from the perfectionism that delays it. Love's imprecise mitten warms as really as the perfectly fitted glove, and the warmth is what is needed. Butler. Insist on genuine persuasion over compelled compliance. He that complies against his will is of his own opinion still, because lasting transformation requires real change of conviction, not behavioral adjustment under pressure. Together. Define both the freedom and the standard of practical communication in the work of transformation. Breed love frees the communicator from the paralysis of perfectionism. Genuine care expressed imprecisely is immeasurably more valuable than perfectly worded indifference. Butler sets the standard for what that communication must ultimately achieve, not surface compliance, but genuine persuasion that changes the opinion beneath the behavior. Together they describe the practically effective communicator. Liberated from the perfectionism that prevents genuine expression, committed to the genuine persuasion that produces real rather than performed change. Civilization layer. Philosophy as common sense and commerce as civilizational force. Quotes 7-8. Madison. Democratize wisdom by revealing its source. Philosophy is common sense with big words, making the deepest insights accessible to anyone willing to think carefully, regardless of specialized training. Gray. Reveal the civilizational stakes of what circulates commercially. Commerce changes the fate and genius of nations, making the exchange of ideas a force as genuinely transformative as the exchange of goods. Together. Complete the framework with its widest lens, the accessibility of wisdom and the civilizational power of its circulation. Madison ensures that the wisdom being shared is genuinely accessible, not protected by vocabulary from the common sense that is its actual source. Gray ensures that the sharing is understood at its full civilizational scale, not merely improving individual lives but reshaping what communities are capable of thinking, valuing, and becoming. Together they describe the practically transforming mission at its grandest. Democratically accessible wisdom, circulating freely enough to change the fate and genius of the nation that receives it.
Free Easy Extra Advantage Math, Spelling and Reading Workbooks you can download for free at stop2think.com or buy at educationstopshate.com. Free Easy Math Wisdom Workbooks with octo repetition to grow math self-confidence. You'll get plenty of repetitive practice of age ranges and averages of our 52 teams of 8 quote authors. Free Easy Alpha Cipher-coded puzzles teach letters, numbers, and phrases using antique wisdoms that encourage and educate. Can you decode this cipher quote of encouragement using either our Learning to Spell or just for fun instructions? And since time is money, practice reading faster with 52 teams of antique rival wisdoms that have passed the test of time to encourage, educate, and entertain generations for centuries. We offer printed versions and timed videos with background music. Sign up for free weekly emails of 52 teams of antique rival wisdom workbooks with easy math, spelling, and reading practice. And, if you'd like to get paid for sharing our wearable wisdoms, keep this in mind. Everyone I know wears a shirt, and most of us change them daily, so change your shirt and change the world. Social equalities are blatantly subliminal antique positive wisdoms repetitively shared without saying a word. This applies to all our wearable shareable wisdoms. Like pretty witty baby onesies and baby teas that you and others will see and read multiple times a day. The same is true with pretty witty kids, but they'll also share these wisdoms with anyone that can read at daycare or school. Youthful truths let your kids gain confidence sharing antique wisdoms with their friends. Imagine them sharing words of wisdom with classmates and teachers. Therefore I think Teas I Wear is a super easy way to share words of wisdom that have passed the test of time. Our social equalities help make us all wiser and kinder with blatantly subliminal messages promoting a more fair and equal opportunity society for all. And don't forget our giftwisdoms.com for birthdays and holidays that makes it easy to share the wisdom with clothing, coffee mugs, and magnets. So do the future a favor by encouraging, educating, and entertaining with words of wisdom that have passed the test of time to make us all wiser and kinder. With wearable wisdoms to fit babies, kids, and adults. You can clothe a whole family, city or state. Join the 52 of 8 today.